Why hello there, and welcome back to Roll for Funding, the series that I tried to do outside of Zine Month, and it kind of spectacularly failed, so I decided to just only do it during Zine Month. And speaking of which, it is Zine Month 2025, the crowdfunding event where people run campaigns for ttrpg zines, and at least half of them are actually ttrpg zines. Okay, maybe not half, but, some of them are. And as I have been doing for the last, 5 years at this point, I guess, I will be looking through the campaigns and picking ones that I think are neat, and then telling you, the viewer, about them. Because that's just what I do, because I'm, cool and an influencer. See, I'm using my influence to get you to check out Kickstarter projects. That makes me an influencer. So here are my Zine Month 2025 Day 1 picks. Yes, just Day 1. So many projects launch on Day 1 that I do a whole video just for Day 1 projects. Starting with Let's Go Rumo, which is a dungeon crawl adventure game for kids 4 and up, which focuses on small environment short-term exploration with simple puzzles and lighthearted challenges that are appropriate for children, and is specifically intended to really work with a child's sense of imagination and also limited attention span by having, as I mentioned, these very limited rooms that you explore one after the other, which makes it a game that can be very easily picked up, but also very easily dropped off, and is intended for playing, around a table, but also while you're on the go, on a walk, hanging out in the backyard, places where kids might just need a little bit of diversion, instead of a whole event of getting out a game and sitting around a table. Versus a lot of other kid-friendly tabletop role-playing games, which just end up being the same murder hobo simulator with aged-down characters. And perhaps most importantly, exposing children early on to simple, purpose-built role-playing games will greatly increase the likelihood that when they are eventually exposed to D&D, they will realize that it is overly complicated and unengaging. And next up, Every Villain is a Loser, which is a game where you play as a villain's minion, doing all of the, actual work of carrying off the heist while your boss is doing battle with the hero or heroes. And at this point, the idea of focusing on the lowest rungs of a costumed criminal organization isn't exactly novel, but this game really seems to have a fun approach to it, focusing, as I mentioned, on the mundane aspects of actually carrying off the heist or whatever other caper you're doing, while the much more exciting action of your boss doing battle with the heroes is going on in the background. And then, of course, rising through the gooning ranks until you can be a villain in your own right. And then presumably at that point you have to become the GM and you start a new game where the players are working under your character. And also it has some very nice classic comic style art to it, which really fits with the campy tone that it seems to be going for. And now, Imagine Queer Worlds, a thoughtful guide to inclusive world building. Gender and sexuality tend to be things that very much get overlooked in world building, especially when those things are not the focus. And when they are the focus, it's not always done incredibly well. And a thing that I feel like in tabletop games specifically does often get even more overlooked because of the fact that, you can just add the diversity yourself. So, a guide for helping writers, designers, and GMs create more diverse and inclusive worlds by giving them resources to help think about those topics and how to direct their shaping of them seems like a really good idea. Especially for those who are not of a queer identity themselves, and while they may be supportive and want to include more diversity in their games, not really be sure about how and where to incorporate those elements into their worlds. But also for those who might be very comfortable and experienced at incorporating real-world sexual and gender diversity in their worlds, but not so much at looking at those concepts from outside of that human-centric lens. Because that was one of the things that really caught my attention here. There definitely does seem to be at least some focus on approaching gender and sexuality of non-human sapient species from the ground up, instead of just starting with the human biological and social aspects and then making a few little tweaks. Like, a species with 3 fluid sexes sounds like a really interesting thing to explore, both biologically and socially. But to do that, you really need to step outside of the very familiar perspective that you're used to. And this guide seems to be aimed at encouraging people to do that. And up next, Fluff and Fury, a cyberpunk ttrpg. Y'all know I love puns. Which is a gonzo dystopian action game where climate change has forced all of humanity to transfer their consciousness into robot bodies. However, the only bodies that most people can afford are adorable robotic teddy bears, which are of course still more than capable of wielding big guns and creating big chaos. It is a D6 dice pool system, but the thing that really caught my attention was the claim that different weapons have different mechanics to them, which is an idea that I really like, because in most combat-focused games, there isn't really much meaningful difference in the feel of using different weapons. It's just, this one deals a D8, this bigger one deals a D10, and so on and so on. So I really like the idea that different weapons will interact with the mechanics differently, and actually feel different when you're playing. Also, I really like the art style here, and it seems like there is a lot of that art, which really helps to enforce the tone of the game. And also, as I said at the beginning, I like a game with a pun title. And finally, Pirouette, a ballet horror ttrpg. What can I say? I'm a sucker for a game that does something different. And while by today's standards, a tarot and block tower based game is not notably different, what it does do is still fairly interesting. Basically, this is a solo game about performing a ballet routine for an amorphous eldritch horror. And that is the idea I like. Picking something that games do not normally focus on and focusing on that, but also putting it in an interesting context and just exploding that single moment. It is a game that takes a very personal, in-depth look at one character doing one thing in a very specific situation with dire consequences for failure. And that is what sounds really interesting about this game. It puts you in an interesting scenario, but then asks you to focus on the character rather than the scenario. Also, there is a full soundtrack as a stretch goal on the campaign, so that's cool. I don't know why we stopped doing soundtracks for role-playing games. I mean, I can only think of like 2, but I'm sure there are more out there. And before you go, there is one more project that I need to mention. The Goblin Guide to Advanced Dice Rolling. An introductory guide to dice math and mechanics so simple even a goblin can understand. And yeah, obviously this is my Zine Month project this year, so if you don't know what I'm talking about when I start rambling on about skewed curves and D48s, the Goblin Guide to Advanced Dice Rolling will answer all those questions for you, and many more that you didn't even know that you had. So there will be a link to that in the description, along with all of the projects discussed in this video, and I will be back Saturday, I believe, with my picks from the first week of Zine Month 2025, excluding the projects that were released on the first day, because they were covered in this video, or I guess the projects that were actually launched before the event started, just because that's how I'm doing it. And thank you for watching. If you enjoy the wacky things I say and do, you can follow me on Blue Sky and/or Tumblr. You can also join me live on Twitch, where sometimes things get a little weird. And extra special thanks to my Fightin' Flail Snails, Broken Unicorn, D-Stex, Hasterfan, Mix Woofers, Nikolai Snowtail, Puggo, Randy Mulholland, Renee D, Stephen Kramer, Teal Aglar, Toshiro Kuro, and Tyro the Fox. If you want to be cool like them, check out my Patreon or YouTube channel memberships, two different things that provide similar but distinct benefits. But if you don't want to do that, that's cool too. You can still hit all the lovely buttons, like, subscribe, these other videos that have mysteriously manifested from the ethers, which I am sure are lovely videos that you will also enjoy. And I will see you next time.